This video will be a character overview and analysis of 4th Prince. Listen, this is the one and only time I'm going to actually try and pronounce his name. After that, it's terror sandwich all the way through. Okay? Okay. As I was saying, this will be a character overview and analysis of 4th Prince Tserriednich Uiguro. Initially, I'll provide an outline of the prince, going to his character and personality. I'll then do an overview of his Nen abilities, followed up by an analysis of his guardian spirit beast. Afterwards, a brief analysis of how likely he is to win the succession war will ensue, and finally I'll finish up by giving my opinion on how good of a king he'd make were he to win the battle for succession. Let's get into it. 4th Prince Terror Sandwich, that feels right, is the younger brother of 1st Prince Benjamin and the second son of 1st Queen Unma. Since a prince's status is a combination of their birth order and their mother's marriage order, the 4th Prince enjoys a substantial amount of princely privilege. Apart from allowing him to indirectly keep tabs on all the other princes, apart from his dear Onis and Benji, his status as the offspring of the 1st Queen permits him to even ignore directives from the 1st Prince, such as when he denied his private guard entry in his quarters. This, in my opinion, either makes him on par with, or even puts him ahead of, 2nd Prince Camilla in overall princely privilege, making Terror Sandwich potentially only second to 1st Prince Benjamin. To go with this, he was also a sponsor of one of Kakin's biggest crime families, the AE or Haley Mafia family. While he probably technically still is, the reason I say was is because his illegitimate stepsister and AE boss, Morena Prudo, ordered for the members to cull each other until a mere 22 remained, using her Hatsu Contagion to turn the mob family into something resembling a Nen-empowered doomsday cult. Since Morena seems to only crave wanton destruction and will, I believe, try to sink the whole damn ship, I think it's safe to say Terror Sandwich's underground connections are borderline non-existent for the rest of the voyage. While the prince doesn't seem overly concerned with the whole ordeal, having found a new plaything to obsess about in the form of Nen, I do believe his obsessive behavior isn't allowing him to truly appreciate the gravitas of the situation. Not only has he lost a valuable ally in the form of Morena and the AE family, depending on how things go, it could turn out that he's gained a powerful enemy in them as well. Now, as far as his personality is concerned, Terror Sandwich is quite special. In no unclear terms, the guy is a violent psychopath whose main thrill comes from witnessing how young people, seemingly exclusively women, fare when put in extreme situations. And by extreme situations, I don't mean paragliding or free climbing. I mean being faced with imminent torture and death. The younger, more beautiful and intelligent the woman, i.e. the brighter her future and higher her prospects, the purer and more visceral the synthesis of the arts, as he calls it. Or in less pretentious terms, the greater Terror Sandwich's satisfaction and pleasure at having single-handedly snuffed out a beautiful woman's promising future in as gruesome a manner as possible. I'd like to emphasize the pleasure aspect of this, since his sadism is either partially or even primarily sexually motivated. This is not at all unusual in serial killers, and I believe that his fixation on women, the few panels of him really immersing himself in his work, as well as the appearance of his guardian spirit beast, all speak to it. This degenerate and perverse impulse of his, the goal of which he claims to be a synthesis of the arts, also manifests in the form of a wide selection of various body parts, as well as art pieces made of real people, while they were presumably still alive. I'll explore this a bit more when I talk about his guardian spirit beast. All I'll mention now is that we've actually seen someone with an extremely similar hobby very early on, namely Neon Nostrade. This poor bastard was definitely turned into fine art while he was very much alive and kicking. And screaming. I guess it's no coincidence that both Terror and her gravitated towards and were fascinated by the Kurta eyes. Oh yeah, the prince has a whole extended family's worth of them, which is the main reason Kurapika agreed to board the Black Whale and assist the Zodiacs in the first place. Wait till he sees it's not only the eyes Terror's got in his private collection. My guy's gonna lose his head. There's no reason to think the Kurta collection is on board the whale though, so that may never actually happen, which would be a wasted opportunity of such magnitudes that I genuinely don't want to even contemplate it. But then again, remember Gyro? Back to the prince and his personality, Terror is as evil a mofo as they come. Despite this, however, his massive charisma stat, which may or may not be owing to his status as a specialist, means that he can turn his murder swing off and on, appearing as a dignified and well-meaning, incomprehensibly rich royal. I can fix him. No, but seriously, he has a whole clique that attended the military academy with him and who, really wanna be friends with the guy. He's influenced their lives to such an extent that one of the main reasons they don't go up the ladder of command is so that their relationship with Terror can remain as pure and wholesome as possible. Let that sink in. I'm not sure why that is exactly, but it's implied that the farther they climb the military ranks, the more their friendship with him will have to take a back seat. I'm assuming because high-ranking army officers need to be as objective and unbiased as possible to adequately perform their duties. Now, how much they're actually familiar with the terror part of the sandwich is unknown. They are at the very least familiar with the fact that he can be insanely obsessive once he finds a new toy, and correctly deduce, based on this, that he's focused all his efforts on mastering Nen. You may think that the use of the word toy may imply that they are indeed familiar with the terror part of the sandwich, but they use an example of him holding himself up in his room and practicing weapon stripping and reassembly exercises without sleeping or eating, until he broke the Academy's record to make their point, which is an innocent enough example that doesn't point to them being aware of anything truly nefarious. They are, at the very least, fully aware that he is more than capable of proactive violence, having shot a fellow cadet over an argument. Actually, it's implied that he may have holed himself up and broken the Academy record, only to prove this unknown person wrong, and then shot him afterwards for good measure, as he may have attempted to minimize or otherwise underplay Terror's commitment or achievement. I guess we can add pettiness and vindictiveness to his list of princely qualities. Despite this, they still adore him, viewing him more as a force of nature than anything else. Let's now move on to talking about his Nen. Terror Sandwich, much like the majority of his siblings, was neither awakened to nor knowledgeable about Nen prior to the voyage. However, following Kurapika's announcement publicizing the existence of Nen, Terror immediately puts himself to mastering this newfound skill, quickly establishing himself as a Nen genius on the level of Gon and Killua at the very least. Since he, like most high-ranking princes, did not bolster his forces via professional hunters, Terror was also very lucky in that he had 2 private guards under his employ that were familiar with Nen, one of whom was poor Theta, who was then tasked with teaching it to him, much to her dismay. If it wasn't already obvious that the dude is conceptually evil before, it couldn't have been more clear to an Nen user like Theta after she witnessed the result of his water divination ritual. Terror turned the water rancid and putrid, establishing his status as a specialist, as well as reinforcing Theta's resoluteness to put an end to the prince before he has the opportunity to do some real damage. However, as much as she's tried to stifle his progress, she's failed on pretty much every front. No, seriously, the sheer scope of her failure to suppress the prince's growth is either tragic, ironic, hilarious, or a combination of all 3. See, she tries to stifle his progress by making him focus on Zetsu as much as possible. The reason she does so is partially because Zetsu is arguably the most innocuous of the 4 principles, and partially because she steels herself to use the opportunity while he is in total Zetsu to blow his degenerate brains out. However, since she's undead unlucky, it turns out that entering Total Zetsu is actually one of the 2 conditions for Terror's pre-wired specialist Hatsu to trigger. Yup, thanks to his specialist status as well as his nigh unrivaled talent, my dude came entirely pre-wired with a fully developed Hatsu right out the gate. While the Hatsu doesn't have an official name as of yet, I've taken to calling it Beelzebub, the ephemeral 10 seconds. The ability is facilitated by the fiendish-looking Nen beast and allows for Terror to instantly look 10 seconds into the future upon closing his eyes and entering total Zetsu. From this moment onward, he continues to see 10 seconds into the future while experiencing real time. Think of it as him essentially having a 10-second head start on everyone else. This lasts until he again opens his eyes. When he does so, he relives in real time the 10 seconds that he previously instantly foresaw. However, while he can move around and act presumably as he wishes during this 10-second interval, other people will act in the exact same way as they did in Terror's vision, pretty much living through a pre-programmed hallucination. Now, there's quite a few things we don't know about the ability. Does it affect only the people that appear in the vision? Does it have a set range, or is it universal? I'm personally of the staunch opinion that it can't be universal and that it must have some constraints with regards to range, since otherwise it would have some very wide-reaching consequences for Hunter x Hunter's world building. But I won't get into that here. I may make a video on the topic if it's ever confirmed. Does it work on people Terror is not aware of, even if they are within range? Does it work on Nen constructs, and so on? However, there are two very important conditions of his Hatsu which have thus far, at least in my opinion, been left ambiguous. If at least one is true, that would elevate Beelzebub Ephemeral 10 Seconds from an A+ or even S rank ability into an S++++. And if both are true, dude solos every character in Hunter x Hunter whose abilities we've seen that's not Meruem or a fully bloodlusted, primed and ready Netero. Let me explain. First, while he can apparently freely move about during the ephemeral 10 seconds, it's thus far unknown whether or not he can actually physically interact with the people living out the vision. For example, could he have just taken Theta's gun and shot her? Would she have regained her senses the moment Terror made physical contact? Would everyone affected regain their senses? If he had his own gun, could he have shot her without first touching her, and in that way avoid dispelling the ability prior to landing a potentially lethal hit? I am of the opinion that if he can interact with the people affected by Beelzebub without incurring any penalties to himself, him trying to touch, choke out, punch, stab, or shoot should absolutely dispel the illusion for the person he's targeting at the very least. This quite simply because the ability would not only be massively overpowered, but also quite boring otherwise, since, as I said, he could choke out or repeatedly punch, stab, or shoot an opponent without prejudice while they're stuck living out the vision. Sure, this wouldn't work against particularly strong and durable physical specimens like Silva or Uvogin, but that's only if he actually has to remain in Zetsu to maintain Beelzebub, which is the second ambiguous condition. You see, it's currently not entirely clear whether Terror has to maintain Zetsu while his eyes are opened, and all the people around him are stuck reliving the ephemeral 10 seconds, or whether he can use his Nen normally within this period. The reason I say it's ambiguous is because neither Terror himself nor the diagram we were given mentions this explicitly. The sole requirement needed for the ephemeral 10 seconds to trigger is for Terror to open his eyes. Entering Zetsu is only mentioned as the initial requirement needed to start the ability, as well as to restart it without there being a gap in between uses. i.e., Terror can close his eyes to restart his future sight without there being a cooldown time in between uses, if he does so within 10 seconds of having opened them, and retain Zetsu the whole time. However, what happens if he decides he doesn't want to restart the ephemeral 10 seconds and releases Zetsu during the 10 seconds his eyes are opened and everyone around him is stuck reliving his vision of the future? Will he simply not be able to, i.e. he'd be in a forced state of Zetsu for the duration? Will his ability immediately stop and the people released from Beelzebub's clutches? Or can he actually freely use his Nen even while the people around him are stuck viewing the vision? I don't think this can work either for two main reasons. A, again, it would be way too OP. Him being able to draw upon his aura while the people around him are trapped would not only entail that his GSB would be active throughout the ephemeral 10 seconds, this since his GSB materializes the moment he releases Zetsu thanks to his impressive aura capacity, but also that he could utilize aura-empowered attacks to his opponents to death. Even if Beelzebub is dispelled the moment Terror attacks someone, either for that specific target or for everyone affected by the ability, that would still be a win condition in the majority of cases. Hits on the chin, even against reasonably proficient enhancers, have shown themselves to be quite effective, so a single Nen-empowered punch against an unprepared opponent would definitely end a fight in a majority of cases. Even in those cases where it does not, Terror could simply land a few good punches, maybe gouge an eye out, or go straight for the family jewels, and then reactivate Zetsu and Beelzebub while the opponent is dazed and reeling from the onslaught to repeat the whole cycle again. Though there is something poetic about his opponents being stuck in a hellish cycle of pain, considering the 666 and the Nen Beast's front. Hence why I decided to go with Beelzebub as its placeholder name. By the way, this is what I meant when I said that the only ones who would be able to stand a chance against Terror in the far-off case that he can both fully interact with people during the ephemeral 10 seconds and use his Nen would be either Meruem or a fully primed and ready Netero, since they're the only ones who are durable and fast enough to do him in before he can enter or re-enter Zetsu. Like, I can see a cathartic scene where Terror just barely manages to trigger his ability before Netero finishes his prayer, since you know, the old man wants to know what the kid can do, and Terror just sees himself getting splattered across the walls and floor, realizes there's absolutely nothing he can do about it, since he's not nearly fast enough to react to it, and just spends the next 9.9 seconds looking at his own splattered remains, and a thoroughly unimpressed and disappointed Netero. With all that said, I'm actually of the opinion, and personally hope, that Terror can neither interact with the people stuck in his ability, like at all, nor use Nen. While this would greatly limit the combat viability of Beelzebub, making its primary function in a battle to be misdirection, confusion, information gathering, and repositioning, where it would actually shine would be outside of combat. With it, he'd be able to gain insight into what his adversary, potential ally, apparent ally, or anyone else would say or do next, thereby giving him a 10-second head start on them, as mentioned at the beginning. There's numerous ways this can be used and abused. By knowing ahead of time what somebody intends or wants, Terror could position himself in as favorable a position as possible, thanks to his genius-level intellect and unbridled charisma. For example, he could foresee that mentioning what is most likely Pyro's head would trigger Kurapika and therefore avoid the subject if he's trying to form an alliance with our boy. I can also see him feigning congeniality and goodwill by insisting that all Nen users must remain in a state of Zetsu for the safety of himself and any of his peers. By insisting on a rule that imposes the constant use of total Zetsu, he'd be able to close his eyes whenever he wanted, under the pretense of intently focusing on or listening to his interlocutor, thereby consistently peering 10 seconds into the future, and thus being alerted ahead of time if anyone attempts to declare war by releasing their Zetsu. As a final thematic note on this, while I use terms like illusion and hallucination, from Terror's perspective, those around him are simply living out their chosen or fated future, while he stands above their meager plebeian existence. He is so above reproach that not even the fates themselves have authority over him. Let's now move on to his guardian spirit beast. As I've established throughout this series, a prince's GSB is a direct reflection of their character, being a manifestation of their personality and desires. This informs not only their abilities, but their appearances as well. And oh boy, does Terror's GSB look like an amalgamation of his browsing history. The kind where you turn on both incognito mode and a VPN, and then burn the device in question for good measure. Why do you think he has so many phones? Seriously though, it's almost tragic that Terror can't see his GSB, since otherwise I think he'd give Hisoka a run for his money in the swinging department. It would be love on first sight, and since the GSB GSB is just a manifestation of Terra's own psyche, it would ultimately be self-love on first sight. The fourth Princess GSB is particularly malicious and aggressive, and seems more than capable of engaging in physical combat to protect its host. While we've yet to see it fight, we did see that it ate the cockroach Queen Oito was controlling, meaning that it can either sense the presence of aura, no matter how feeble, within a certain radius, or that it's just insanely perceptive and actually heard it scuttling about in the vents. Now, how powerful would it actually be in a physical fight, we can only guess at. But I think it's safe to say it wouldn't just sit idly by while Terror was getting assailed, nor be a total pushover. It would most likely attack via its xenomorph-esque mouth-tongue thingy and its horse-like heeled hind quarters. Try saying that 3 times fast. Apart from physical attacks, it also has the ability to mark and punish individuals who go against the prince. Terror, in all his edgy glory, once said that he wants to sort people into either useful or useless trash when he becomes king. Well, I think the GSB's ability is meant to do just that. Most of the details are thus far unknown, but we know that lying or potentially trying to harm the prince will cause the GSB to attack and mark the liar by slashing them. The reason I say potentially in case of an attack is because it may not happen when someone who's not a subordinate of his attacks the prince, since I think that the actual trigger for the GSB's ability is lying. Either verbally or lying in a sense by breaching the prince's trust, i.e. being disloyal. Marking a valid target counts as strike 1 and leaves a small visible scar on the target's body. Theta was marked when the prince asked whether or not he could trust her, and she answered in the affirmative. Strike 2 happened when she tried to blow the prince's brains out. That's an escalation. It takes the form of a kind of corrupting blemish that forms around the initial scar. It would seem that just lying to the prince and trying to full-on assassinate him are both worth a single strike. Fair enough, I guess you got 2 tries before you get transmogrified into an inhuman amalgamation of various fetishes and suffer a fate worse than death. While not guaranteed that this is the final effect following strike 3, Selkov, Theta's work husband and the other Nen user under the prince's employ, I think correctly conjectures that the only reason a traitor would be left alive and given a final warning is to turn them into a loyal servant of the prince. Since the GSB explicitly warns Theta that she won't be human if she goes against the prince again, I think it's fair to assume that strike 3 means that Theta will be transfigured into an abomination resembling the GSB itself. A living, breathing synthesis of the arts in Terror's eyes. And one he can actually admire, since both he and everyone else would be able to see it. Since Theta's a Nen user, if this fate does ever befall her, she may turn into one of the prince's greatest assets, if she retains her enhanced physical traits and potentially even control of her aura. Now, something I'd like to quickly focus on at the end of this segment: the interaction between the 2 Nen beasts, i.e. the GSB and the one I'm calling Beelzebub. I don't think it's at all accidental that Beelzebub, Ephemeral 10 Seconds, was created to work while the prince was explicitly in a state wherein he's by far the most defenseless, i.e. in Zetsu. The 2 beasts complement each other diabolically well. While the GSB is there to protect Terror under any other circumstances, it cannot sustain its form for very long while the prince is in Zetsu, which is when Beelzebub comes into play. It allows the prince to foresee practically any and all threats that might assail him, allowing him to evade or counterattack. While this will be less relevant in the future once he's mastered entering and exiting Zetsu in an instant, it's literally already saved his life. I believe this may be why the GSB decided not to give Theta a strike 2 in this moment, when Theta claimed that Zetsu was the real key to truly mastering Nen. The GSB was even riled at this, but Theta convinces it by seemingly convincing herself that she's not technically lying. As one of the 4 major principles, mastering Nen is of course predicated on mastering Zetsu, but I'd argue that all the principles are of equal importance. As such, this statement can be viewed as 2 things: an exaggeration as well as a lie of omission. The exaggeration part is clear, but why was it a lie? because of Theta's intention. She overemphasized the importance of Zetsu so as to leave the prince vulnerable and blow his degenerate brains out. This means that either A, lies of omission and exaggerations will not trigger the effects of the GSB, or B, that the GSB realized it was a lie, its conditions were met, and it was ready to mark Theta once again, but decided against it, knowing that the core mechanic of Terror's innate ability is indeed Zetsu. This would make it exceptionally proactive, intelligent, and cunning for a guardian spirit beast, which would also make it all the more dangerous. Having said that, let's now discuss how likely he is to win the battle for succession from an entirely in-world perspective. Currently, 4th Prince Terror Sandwich is easily among the top 3 princes with regards to his prospects for winning the whole succession war, with there being a solid argument that he's currently at the very tippy top of that list. See, while he may not have been awakened to Nen prior to the voyage, he is learning at such an unprecedented pace that he'll very soon rival, if not even surpass, the likes of 1st Prince Benjamin and 2nd Prince Camilla. Hell, his precognitive ability is the perfect counter to her own, since he'll know not to land the finishing blow in a direct way or else get turned into a terror smoothie. Though I have to ask, what happens if she's trapped in the hallucination and thinks he killed her? Will her ability activate? Or probably not, since it is powered via post-mortem Nen. But if she's convinced herself that she has died, could the sensation of dying, with which she's already very much familiar, nonetheless trigger Cat's name? And if it does, what happens then? There are a few ways that interaction could go, but such a long-shot hypothetical is way beyond the scope of this video. Just food for thought. Benjamin, on the other hand, would be a much harder nut to crack. As a rule, GSBs do not attack other GSBs or their hosts, meaning that the two princes would need to duke it out purely on their own merits. And considering Benjamin's toughness, power, and versatility, I don't think Terror's ability is the best matchup against Benjamin's own in a proper 1v1. Even if he can directly interact with people while they're trapped in his ability, unless he can use his Nen to empower his attacks, I don't think there's anything he can really do against Big Bro Benji. Actually, speaking of Benjis, an aforementioned Benjamin's knife would really save Terror's bacon in this case. If they can cut Silva, they can definitely cut Benjamin. This Benjamin, not the one who made them. Well, I know, I mean him too, but that's not the point. Never mind. Beyond specific 1v1 matchups, while he does have 2 competent Nen users at his disposal, those being Theta and Salkov, they're both actually trying to kill the bastard, so they can barely be counted among allies. While his men have begun learning Nen thanks to Kurapika's classes, so have the guards and staff of many other princes, so that won't do anything to bolster his position much. As mentioned, his loss of Morena, the AE boss, is a significant blow to his information network and general options. This not only because of the shenanigans happening in the lower decks, which could very easily spill out into the 2nd and even 1st floors, but also because the AE family primarily controlled the 3rd deck of the Black Whale, meaning that they almost certainly had their own routes and methods of transporting goods, information, and people from the 3rd to the sealed off 2nd floor. This is a dangerous combination, since if another family takes over those assets, 3rd Prince Zhang Lei or 7th Prince Luzurus could use their connections to make deals and get some quite unsavory individuals to the upper decks to do their dirty work for them. Despite all this potential upheaval, however, I'd say he's currently doing more than fine. His siblings have left him alone, for the most part, with everyone who's taking proactive action being focused on 1st Prince Benjamin, 2nd Prince Camilla, 9th Prince Halkenberg, and thanks to Kurapika and his Nen classes, 14th Prince Wobble. Benjamin in particular has his hands full dealing with these 3 potential threats, and since he wasn't able to send over his personal soldier to watch over his dear little brother, he is entirely blind to what Terror's been up to. The fact that he wasn't familiar with Nen prior to the voyage will actually be Terror's biggest trump card against Big Bro Benji. I can easily see the seething grumpy puss that is Benji deciding to quickly dispose of his little brother as soon as the chance shows itself, only to find himself entirely ill-prepared for what he has become. Terror should absolutely do his utmost to hide the fact that he is awakened to Nen, and avoid making public appearances so as to not tip off Benjamin or Camilla. One of the other major things that's keeping him from definitively occupying that #1 spot is that, unbeknownst to him, our boy Kurapika is gunning for him. While Kurapika doesn't intend on killing the prince, I don't think that reservation will last very long. I don't think I have to explain all the reasons why that is. And when the number of princes has thinned, you can bet your butt Kurapika will ally with pretty much anyone if it'll allow him to get closer to his sole reason for joining the expedition and the Zodiacs in the first place. Finally, how good of a king would Terror Sandwich make were he to win the battle for succession? I genuinely and seriously think that were he to win, he'd be lauded as one of the better and more successful rulers in Kakin's history. I know, I'm fully aware of everything I've said thus far, but hear me out on this. He is extremely intelligent, educated, determined, and above all, charismatic. Apart from potentially first Prince Benjamin, none of the other princes seem to be aware of the truly darker aspects of his personality. Hell, Goody Two-Shoes turned determined badass Halkenberg views him as the only one among the princes that he genuinely respects. Terror knows how to keep up appearances, and he's not nearly as much of a Saturday morning villain as some of his early appearances or comments suggest. Yeah, he definitely believes he is above everyone else, and in general views people as either useful or useless trash. But I do think he's fully aware that he cannot actually act like a petulant shonen villain as the king. While I do think he'd definitely want to realize this ideal in some way, I don't think he'd take steps to actually do a Viltrumite-like calling or something. Instead, I think he'd double down on and co-opt the already existing Kakin caste system, but perhaps make it more merit-based instead of purely birth-dependent. As in, those who show great promise, talent, and are dedicated to their work or studies would have the opportunity to move up in the system, while those who've indulged themselves without contributing anything of value would be relegated to the lower castes until they've proven their worth once again. This would then be his way of segregating the useful trash from the useless garbage. Hey, it's fascistic, authoritarian, and a bunch of other political jargon I'm probably not using correctly, but please do bear in mind this is a country where your whole damn family can suffer the legal consequences of your perceived legal transgressions. At least this way you'll have some class mobility, I guess. I do think the transfigured humans he'd keep around as bodyguards or living art pieces would be difficult to spin in a positive light though. I guess you could always use them as a deterrent in a kind of this is what happens to those who commit the greatest of sins by betraying the king sort of way. Not the best international PR, but it does get the message across. Oh, and don't be mistaken, literally thousands upon thousands will be tortured and killed by the prince personally throughout his long reign, in order to satiate his, dark urge. Keep in mind, he's awakened to Nen, so he could easily reach 100 and still be alive and kicking. Or I guess in his case, mutilating. All in all, while not the best choice, as an average resident of Kakin, I'd take him over Camilla any day of the damned week. You just need to hope it's your neighbor's daughter that gets called to the prince's palace and not yours. And that's 4th Prince Terror Sandwich covered. I don't have a lot of time since this video is already running late, so I'll just thank you very much for watching, ask for your feedback regarding any of the things I've said in the video, thank Kamaswami for going the extra mile in supporting the channel, and hopefully see you in the next one.